The St. Augustine Cathedral in Philadelphia was bathed in afternoon sunlight, its stained glass windows casting jewel-toned shadows across the marble floor. Grace Calloway stood before 300 guests in her custom Vera Wang gown, a cascade of white roses clutched in trembling hands. Father Matthew's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling as he asked William if he would take Grace as his lawfully wedded wife. The silence that followed stretched like an eternity, the string quartet's melody faltering as William's jaw clenched tight. "I can't do this," William finally whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as he leaned closer, his voice now only for Grace's ears. "Your family's company is worthless, and I refuse to tie myself to a sinking ship." Grace's vision tunneled as William turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor, the only sound in the cavernous space. The bouquet trembled violently in her hands as she stood frozen, unable to process the public humiliation. The whispers started immediately, a low buzz of horror and excitement, because nothing brought people together quite like watching someone else's world collapse. Grace saw her mother stand, hand pressed to her mouth in shock, while her younger brother David's face had gone sheet white. The cathedral doors remained open from William's exit, the afternoon sun creating a blinding rectangle of light that seemed to mock the darkness suddenly enveloping Grace's heart. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs refused to move. Then the ground seemed to shake as the sound of vehicles, dozens of them, screeched to a halt outside. Black SUVs lined the street as far as the eye could see, their tinted windows reflecting the sun like obsidian mirrors. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the sun, tall and commanding in a tailored black suit. The figure strode down the aisle with purposeful steps that made people unconsciously lean away, an invisible force field of authority preceding him. Grace could finally see him clearly as he approached. Sharp jawline, intense eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul, dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on a Renaissance painting. He couldn't be older than 27, yet carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Behind him, men in identical dark suits filed into the cathedral, positioning themselves at every exit, hands clasped before them in a stance that wasn't threatening, but made their purpose clear. No one was leaving without permission. "This wedding won't end," the man announced, his voice deep and smooth with the faintest trace of an Italian accent. "It just changes grooms." The cathedral erupted in chaos, people shouting questions, Grace's mother screaming. The stranger extended his hand to Grace, ignoring the commotion around them as though it was merely background noise. "Matteo Valenti," he said simply, dark eyes fixed on hers. "And you're going to marry me instead." Grace stared at his outstretched hand like it was a venomous snake, her mind unable to process this surreal turn of events. I don't know you," she managed to say, her voice small and childlike in the vast cathedral space. "No," Matteo agreed with a slight nod. "But your father knew me very well, and the Calloway debt to my organization is now your responsibility." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne, and something darker. Danger, perhaps. The cathedral had fallen into stunned silence, hundreds of eyes watching this exchange as though it were a particularly captivating play. Grace could almost feel the smartphones recording, knowing that her humiliation was now transforming into something even more spectacularly viral. "You have two choices, Grace," Matteo continued, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. "You can leave here alone, publicly abandoned, and watch your family lose everything by Monday morning. Or you can take my hand, complete this ceremony, and I'll ensure the Calloway name survives." Grace looked past him at the sea of shocked faces, her mother's tears, her brother's terror, guests already texting furiously. William was probably halfway to the airport by now, escaping the disaster he'd created while she stood in its epicenter. Her entire life had been destroyed in front of 300 witnesses, her reputation, her dignity, her carefully planned future, all evaporated in a matter of minutes. What did she have left to lose? Her hand moved almost of its own accord, trembling fingers placing themselves in Matteo's waiting palm. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, absolutely certain. "Smart choice," he murmured, then turned to Father Matthews, who looked like he might faint at any moment. "Start over from the beginning, Father, and make it quick. I have business to attend to this evening." The reception hall felt like a fever dream, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light over tables of uneaten food, a wedding cake no one would cut, champagne flowing freely as guests alternated between awkward silence and feverish whispers. Matteo sat beside her, utterly relaxed, champagne glass never empty, as though marrying a stranger in a hostile takeover was a perfectly normal Sunday activity. Men in dark suits, his men, stood at strategic points around the room, their presence making it clear this celebration would continue as planned. "You should eat something," Matteo said without looking at her. "The salmon is excellent, and you'll need your strength for the conversation we're about to have." He took a sip of champagne, dark eyes scanning the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Grace pushed her untouched plate away, leaning closer to him. "I just married a complete stranger at gunpoint. Forgive me if I've lost my appetite," she hissed, surprised by her own boldness. "I'd prefer to understand what the hell is happening before I worry about proper nutrition." "You married a solution to your problems," Matteo replied, finally turning to face her fully. The intensity in his eyes made her lean back slightly in her chair. "Would you prefer I'd let William humiliate you and walked away?" The limousine ride to Matteo's estate in the hills overlooking Philadelphia was silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Grace stared out the tinted windows, watching the city lights blur as they ascended into the wealthy enclave of Bryn Mawr, where old money mingled with new power. The mansion appeared suddenly around a bend, a modern fortress of stone and glass perched on a hill, surrounded by a 12-foot wall topped with security cameras. The iron gates opened automatically as their convoy approached, armed guards nodding respectfully as the caravan of black SUVs passed through. "Welcome to your new home," Matteo said, as they pulled into a circular driveway where a marble fountain depicted Poseidon wielding his trident. "My staff has prepared the east wing for you. You'll have your privacy, but don't mistake that for freedom." The interior was a study in controlled opulence. Italian marble floors, priceless art on every wall, furniture that looked centuries old yet perfectly maintained. A staff of silent, efficient people appeared to take Grace's belongings, their eyes carefully avoiding hers as they carried her wedding luggage up a sweeping staircase. "Your room has a panic button beside the bed," Matteo informed her, leading her through corridors that seemed designed to disorient. "Not that you'd need it. The windows are bulletproof, and there are guards patrolling the grounds at all hours." Grace stopped abruptly, turning to face her new husband with newfound courage born of exhaustion and shock. "Protection from what?" she demanded, surprised when her voice didn't tremble. "Or should I ask from whom?" Matteo's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for her directness. "From the same people who convinced William to humiliate you today, from business rivals who would use you against me, from anyone who sees you as leverage." Before she could respond, a man appeared in the doorway, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the late hour. His eyes were cold and assessing as they swept over Grace, cataloging every detail like an appraiser with a questionable antique. "Mrs. Valenti," he greeted her, the formality of the name she'd possessed for less than 6 hours striking her like a physical blow. "I'm Samuel Richardson, Mr. Valenti's consigliere. We have some matters to discuss regarding your brother." Grace's stomach tightened at the mention of David, her 19-year-old brother who had looked so pale at the wedding. "What about him?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady as Samuel exchanged a meaningful glance with Matteo. Samuel pulled out a tablet and slid it across the marble-topped side table. "These are his financial activities for the past 3 months. I suggest you review them before our conversation tomorrow." He nodded curtly and departed, leaving Grace staring at the screen in horror. The tablet showed gambling debts, hundreds of thousands of dollars lost at underground poker games, online betting sites, sports wagers. Names of loan sharks she'd never heard of were highlighted in red, payment schedules missed, threatening messages received. 3 days into her new marriage, Grace sat at the breakfast table picking at her omelet while scrolling through her phone. The wedding disaster had gone viral. Altar upgrade was trending, with someone having posted both William's exit and Matteo's dramatic entrance, comments ranging from horrified to oddly supportive. "Put that away," Matteo commanded, appearing suddenly in the doorway wearing a tailored navy suit that complemented his olive complexion. "You're coming with me to a business meeting. Important people, investors, associates who are curious about my new wife." Grace placed her phone down, raising an eyebrow. "And why would I do that? To be paraded around like some trophy you won in a hostile takeover?" The boldness in her voice surprised her. Perhaps sleeping in a fortress had given her a false sense of security. "Because you're my wife, and I need them to see that," Matteo replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "This marriage needs to look real, Grace, which means you sit beside me, Smile and play your part. Can you do that? Or shall I revisit the alternatives we discussed at the cathedral? The meeting was held at a private club in downtown Philadelphia, the kind without signage where membership was by invitation only and cost more than most people's annual salary. 12 men in expensive suits sat around a mahogany table when they arrived, all watching Grace like scientists observing a lab specimen. Mateo pulled out a chair for her at the head of the table, a gesture of both courtesy and possession. "Gentlemen," he began, "this is my wife, Grace." The introduction was simple, yet carried weight, positioning her as something more than decorative. A man with salt and pepper hair and hard eyes leaned forward with a predatory smile. "So the rumors are true. The altar abandonment wasn't humiliation. It was an upgrade." His gaze slid over Grace dismissively. "Though I have to wonder what she brings to the table besides a pretty face and a bankrupt shipping company." "Richard manages our Boston operations," Mateo informed Grace, his tone neutral yet carrying an undercurrent of warning. "He excels at identifying vulnerabilities, though sometimes mistakes surface judgment for insight." The subtle rebuke silenced the table momentarily. Another man, younger with slicked-back hair and calculating eyes, cut through the tension. "The Callaway shipping network is hemorrhaging money. 3 major clients dropped them last quarter after that suspicious dock fire." He turned to Grace directly. Why would Mateo tie himself to such an obvious liability? Grace felt Mateo tense beside her, recognizing this wasn't just curiosity, but a challenge to his judgment. Drawing on years of business dinners with her father, she straightened her spine and met the man's gaze directly. "Because he sees potential where others see problems," she heard herself say. The table fell silent, all eyes turning to her with renewed interest. The younger man smirked. "How enlightening. What potential does a failing company with $20 million in debt offer the Valenti organization?" His tone suggested there was no possible good answer. The docks were still burning when they arrived, orange flames licking up into the night sky, consuming 3 massive warehouses. Fire trucks lined the pier, their hoses barely making a dent as the smell of burning chemicals and charred wood choked the air. Mateo stood at the edge of the police barricade, his face carved from stone while Samuel spoke urgently into his phone, barking orders. Other men in suits surrounded them. Soldiers, Grace had learned to call them. The muscle of the organization that kept the Valenti empire functioning. "How much?" Mateo asked, his voice deadly calm in stark contrast to the chaos around them. Samuel hung up his phone, expression grim as he delivered the verdict. 8 million in product, maybe 10. The insurance won't cover half of it. Grace understood the subtext. Illegal cargo, the kind that couldn't be reported to authorities or claimed on official documentation. She stood slightly apart, wrapped in a coat hastily thrown over her nightgown, when Mateo had dragged her from sleep to witness this disaster. "Who?" Mateo's question was simple, but the promise of violence underneath made Grace's skin prickle. Samuel's expression darkened further as he gestured toward a laptop set up in the back of an SUV. Security footage shows someone accessed the warehouse at 2 a.m., someone with clearance codes. Samuel pulled up grainy video, showing a figure in dark clothing approaching the warehouse entrance, punching in a code, then disappearing inside. 20 minutes later, the figure emerged and walked calmly away. 30 seconds after that, flames appeared in the windows, spreading with unnatural speed. "Can you see their face?" Mateo asked, leaning closer to the screen. "No, but we traced the access code." Samuel pulled up another screen showing security credentials, pointing to one entry with a name that made Grace's blood run cold. "David Callaway. Your brother-in-law had access codes to our warehouse. When exactly did that happen?" All eyes turned to Grace, the soldier's expressions shifting from neutral to hostile in an instant. "I don't," she stammered, mind racing. "David was helping inventory some family assets in the shared warehouse space last week, before the wedding. I gave him temporary access. You gave your gambling addict brother access to our facilities after everything I told you about his debts?" Samuel's face flushed with anger. 8 million up in smoke because you brought a traitor into this family. "I'm not a traitor," Grace protested, her voice rising. "And neither is David. Check the timestamps. His code was used at 2 a.m., but where was he? Can you track him?" Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she was fighting for both their lives. Samuel worked the laptop for a moment, then cursed under his breath. His phone was off, no GPS data. He looked at Mateo meaningfully. "Convenient, isn't it? Almost like he knew we'd be looking. Or someone stole his code," Grace countered, her voice rising with desperation. "The Richardson family has been targeting us. They paid William to humiliate me at the altar, and now they're framing David to destroy your trust in us. Listen to her making excuses while our business burns." One of the soldiers scoffed, his hand drifting toward the bulge beneath his jacket. "I say we cut our losses, her and the brother, before they destroy everything." The words hung in the smoky air like a death sentence, as Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Mateo, searching his face for any sign of belief, any flicker of trust beneath his impenetrable mask. "Did you know?" he asked softly, stepping closer until she could see flecks of amber in his dark irises. "Did you know your brother would do this?" His voice was calm, but carried the weight of her fate within each syllable. "No," Grace answered firmly, refusing to look away despite the fear coursing through her veins. "David is impulsive and desperate, but this, destroying millions in product, risking his life, risking mine, this isn't him." Mateo studied her for a long moment, while the fire raged behind them, illuminating his face in flickering orange light. "Samuel," he finally said, without breaking eye contact with Grace, "find David Calloway. I don't care if you have to search every casino and bar in the Northeast." "And her?" Samuel asked pointedly, his tone making it clear what course of action he recommended. Grace held her breath, acutely aware that her very existence hung on Mateo's next words. "She stays," Mateo declared with finality, "under guard. If she tries to leave the estate or contact anyone without my knowledge, stop her." He turned back toward the burning warehouses. "Now find her brother so we can get some answers." Grace watched the soldiers disperse, Samuel barking orders into his phone as he walked away. She stood alone beside Mateo, watching millions of dollars burn, while knowing that her life hung by an even thinner thread than their week-old marriage. "If you're lying to me," Mateo said softly, his gaze still fixed on the flames, "if you had any part in this, there won't be anywhere you can hide." His voice carried no anger, only the cold certainty of a promise. "I understand," Grace whispered, wrapping her arms around herself against the sudden chill, despite the heat of the fire. "But I need you to understand something too. Someone is setting us both up." Mateo turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable in the dancing shadows. "Then you have until Samuel finds your brother to prove it. Otherwise, I can't protect you from what happens next." Grace hadn't slept in 36 hours when the breakthrough finally came. Surrounded by laptops, financial records, and surveillance logs in Mateo's private study, she'd pieced together the puzzle that had nearly cost her and David their lives. The mansion erupted in commotion just past midnight. Shouting, the sound of struggling, her brother's voice raised in desperate apology. Grace rushed to the foyer where 2 guards dragged David toward Mateo's office, his face bruised, one eye swollen shut. "I'm sorry, Grace, I'm so sorry," David sobbed as Samuel shoved him roughly into a chair. Mateo stood by the window, his back to them, radiating a cold fury that made the room feel like the inside of a glacier. "David Calloway," Mateo said without turning around, "you used access codes registered to you to enter our warehouse 3 nights ago. Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now." His voice was devoid of emotion, each word falling like a stone into still water. "It wasn't me," David stammered, words tumbling out in panic. "I swear I was at the Blue Diamond Casino all night. Ask anyone at the high-stakes table. I lost $15,000 on a bad hand of Texas Hold'em." Samuel stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Your code was used at 2:17 a.m. Are you saying someone stole it?" The skepticism in his voice was palpable as he exchanged a glance with Mateo, who had finally turned to observe the interrogation. "Start from the beginning," Mateo commanded, leaning against his desk with deceptive casualness. "And remember that each lie makes your situation considerably worse." The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but unmistakable. David wiped his face with shaking hands, looking desperately at Grace before beginning his confession. 6 months ago, I got in deep with a bookie. 200 grand? They were going to break my legs or worse." He continued haltingly, describing how a man named Jackson had approached him, claiming to work for the Richardson family. He said they'd pay off my debt if I gave them information. Shipping schedules, security protocols, anything I could learn from Grace about the Calloway business. I thought it was just corporate espionage. David's voice cracked, as tears streamed down his swollen face. "After the wedding, after I realized what Grace had married into, I told Jackson I was done, that I wouldn't give them anything else." Samuel slammed his hand on the desk, making David flinch. "Yet somehow they got your access codes to our warehouse? That's quite a coincidence." His skepticism was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike, as David shrank further into his chair. "They showed me pictures." David whispered, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. Our mother coming out of church, shopping at the grocery store. A man standing right behind her in line, smiling at the camera like it was nothing. The photo showed their mother, oblivious, examining a produce display, while behind her, a man in a leather jacket stared directly at the camera with a predatory grin. They said if I didn't give them the codes, he'd follow her home, so I gave them the codes. Grace slid the tablet across the table toward Mateo, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The warehouse security system has a hidden back door. Someone installed monitoring software that creates perfect duplicates of access credentials without triggering alerts. Wireless transfer logs showed bursts of data leaving the security server 3 days before the fire, coinciding perfectly with unexplained entries in the main building. Grace had discovered a virtual fingerprint, faint but unmistakable, leading back to one of Mateo's most trusted associates. This is the bank transfer that proves everything, she explained, highlighting a series of offshore transactions. $500,000 moved through 7 shell companies before landing in an account registered to Peter Hayes, your head of security. Samuel's face drained of color as the evidence mounted, his loyalty to Mateo warring with his disbelief that Hayes, a 15-year veteran of their organization, could betray them so completely. The timestamps, financial trails, and duplicated security codes formed an airtight case. Hayes had been the Richardson family's inside man for years, Grace discovered, systematically undermining Mateo's operations while positioning himself as indispensable. Her investigation had uncovered not just a traitor, but an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy the Valenti Empire from within. The Boston Harbor operation was Mateo's most decisive strike against the Richardson family, not a shot fired, yet more devastating than any bullet. Based on Grace's investigation, his men intercepted a massive shipment, seizing $12 million in product and leaving Richardson's entire East Coast distribution network in shambles. Anonymous tips to the FBI led to the arrest of Jackson and 6 other Richardson lieutenants, charged with everything from racketeering to attempted murder. Thomas Richardson himself vanished. Rumor had it he'd fled to the Cayman Islands, his empire crumbling behind him. 2 months after her wedding day, Grace stood in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, wearing a gown that cost more than her first car. The room sparkled with Philadelphia's elite, business associates, politicians, even a few celebrities who pretended not to know the true nature of their host's business. This wasn't a belated reception, but rather a coronation. Mateo had called it a celebration of partnership, but Grace understood its real purpose. Tonight was Mateo's public declaration that she belonged in this world, that she had earned her place at his side. She watched from across the room as her husband worked the crowd, accepting congratulations on decimating the Richardson threat. He moved with the confidence of a king surveying his domain, powerful men stepping aside as he passed. You seem to be adjusting well. Samuel appeared beside her, offering a glass of champagne with newfound respect in his eyes. 2 months ago, he'd been ready to dispose of her as a liability. Now he deferred to her judgment on business matters. David approached, looking healthier than he had in years, clear-eyed and focused since completing the rehabilitation program Mateo had arranged. I can never make up for what I did, he said quietly, but Mateo's giving me a chance with legitimate work, managing the shipping routes. The capture of Hayes had been a masterpiece of strategic deception. Grace's plan involved feeding him false information about a vulnerable shipment, while Mateo's actual operation targeted the Richardsons' primary distribution center. The double cross had been executed with surgical precision. Grace had transformed the legitimate side of their business, restructuring shipping routes to increase efficiency by 40%, while establishing new contracts with pharmaceutical companies needing discreet, temperature-controlled transport. The innovations had doubled their legal revenue stream in under 2 months. Grace squeezed his arm reassuringly before excusing herself, making her way toward the terrace where Mateo stood alone, silhouetted against the city lights. You wanted to see me? She asked, the gold wedding band no longer feeling foreign on her finger. Do you remember what I said to you the night we met? Mateo asked without turning around. About you being my investment? My asset? His voice carried none of the coldness she'd grown accustomed to during their first weeks together. Yes, Grace replied, stepping beside him to look out over the glittering cityscape that seemed to mirror the transformation of her life. You said our marriage was a transaction, a way to protect assets and consolidate power. Mateo turned to face her, something in his expression making her breath catch, a softness she'd glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments. I was wrong, he said simply, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a platinum ring with an enormous emerald surrounded by diamonds. "This isn't a proposal. We're already married," he clarified, slipping it onto her right hand. "This is a promise that things are different now. When they left you at the altar, they wanted to break you," Mateo continued, his fingers lingering on hers. "Instead, you outplayed everyone, found the traitor in my organization, saved my business, and turned a forced marriage into a true partnership." Grace felt tears threatening to spill as Mateo led her back inside, raising his hand for silence as they entered the ballroom. The crowd parted, conversations dying as all eyes turned toward them with expectant curiosity. "A few months ago, I married this woman to protect business interests," Mateo announced, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "Tonight, I introduce you to my true partner, my equal, the woman who saved this family from destruction and proved that the Valenti Empire isn't just mine anymore. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.